Hello, everyone. Welcome to Web Performance and SEO Podcast. And today on the stream, I have Nicolas Steenhout. I hope I didn't mispronounce that once again. And today, our topic will be on accessibility. Glad to have Nicolas talk about his experience with accessibility and how he sees the intersection with web performance. So, Nicolas, good to have you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so I know you are a keynote speaker, you are an independent consultant, and would you like to introduce yourself a bit?
Yes, thank you. So yeah, I'm Nick Steenhout. I do accessibility, and I've done accessibility for nearly 30 years. So these days, I do a lot of consulting with large companies, a lot of strategic planning and thinking about accessibility more than just the auditing bit, but there's always a bit of auditing. Um, and I also have been doing public speaking about accessibility for a number of years, and now I focus on doing keynotes to companies, just kind of like, you know, making people think about it, and suddenly they go, "Oh, I never thought about that." And the more people we have that hadn't thought about accessibility, but suddenly they start thinking about it, is going to be better for the industry, but ultimately for disabled people.
Yeah, I think it's a topic that doesn't get talked about that much. For me, also, I didn't. Throughout the places I worked, I can't count anywhere that has had topics around accessibility. And in Germany, I know from June there will be some kind of enforcement, so maybe more businesses will start paying attention.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe with the bigger stick that's coming behind, people will pay more attention.
Yeah, and with that, I never really got much working experience trying to solve for it and getting people to uh, pay attention to. It's a
Mm,
bit similar also to web performance in general. Uh, in the recent years, most of my project then, when I was still full time employed, was focused on frameworks. So with Next.js, when they release and say something is faster, the companies usually stick to it that, oh, Next.js got a bit faster, and no real measurement to see if
mm.
it's impacting users beyond looking at maybe making campaigns and analytics and also.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So for me, this podcast is more like, exploring areas that I don't have a lot of experience in or expertise in, and learning from experts, using that to see other projects that come for me in the future, how I can really harness them and
Mm.
get better at it.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm curious also to, know a bit more about you in terms of your career, how you got started with accessibility,
Mm,
and maybe after that we can talk about how you see things shaping up for the future.
sure. So I was working in a small nonprofit where we were providing services to disabled people. Um, and in the space of about 3 weeks, I had three people come to me. The first one was blind, and he came in and he says, "Hey, Nick, can you help me out here? My website, my screen reader is telling me that this website that I'm working on is just saying image, 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 image." So I had to look, and this was a time when we didn't have CSS. So to use fancy fonts, we would use images of text. We would do a Photoshop design, we would slice it, and then we would use the different elements. So we would have images of text to build a menu. But this particular menu did not have um, alt attributes set for the menu. So that was my first thinking about, oh, this is interesting. This hobby of mine that I've been doing website for fun actually has an impact on my profession, because at the time I was doing a lot of built environment accessibility. Um, about a week later, someone who is deaf came into me and she said, "Nick, can you help me? I have this video here on a CD to help me set up my new printer. but there's no captions on the video. So, the first time was, oh, accessibility is difficult for blind people, and then it's difficult for deaf folks. And then a few days later, we had someone who had pretty bad ADHD, and she came in and she says, Nick, the web, I can't use it. There's big fonts, there's flashing colors, there's things moving, and I really can't use that. So I worked with her in building what, a few years later we would call custom user uh, style sheets. Um, so between those three, I realized that accessibility really was important. And because I was having fun on the web building websites, um, this was in the days of HTML3, so a while back. Um, I started doing it more and more and more, and getting involved with uh, first knowing the standards, and then being involved with the working groups, and just doing a lot of auditing and a lot of public speaking. So it kind of grew organically, but it was really this thing. I had been working on the web, and then three people came to me and they told me about accessibility in a way that I could not forget.
Mm. That's that's interesting. How you got pulled in from not doing, you as you were a website developer, but not specifically accessibility, and then see
Yeah.
it first and how how that impacted it. I think that also helps bring in the empathy, when you
Mm,
try to do this work rather than coming at it from oh, I want to specialize in this and make more money because
mm.
it's trendy, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Accessibility still is really not trendy. It's not a fashionable thing, but it's so important.
Yeah. And how do you see, the with the coming of LLMs and AIs? How do you see it affecting how, you know we use this website, like things that I think maybe from OpenAI or Anthropic with like the computer use, and also in terms of people using, just building with AI editors, and those things just output code without paying much attention to usability.
I have never been shy to say I don't like AI for a number of reasons. On the one hand, it's destroying our planet. It's so resource intensive. Uh, but more specifically, talking about AI, LLMs, and accessibility, the reality is that those things are programmed, are trained, are shaped by people that don't, A, they don't know about accessibility, and B, they don't care about accessibility. So the learning patterns are only as good as the people that feed them the patterns and select the patterns. And overall, LLMs and AI know very little about accessibility. So when we're starting to look at, you know, if you ask ChatGPT about what is accessibility, well, 3 years ago it knew nothing. Now it's able to regurgitate something that kind of makes sense, but it also makes some pretty bad mistakes. Where it becomes a problem is using AI to generate accessible code, because it can only be trained on code that's out there. And considering that 99.9% of the web is not actually accessible, it's going to train on things that aren't accessible, and it's going to regurgitate markup that isn't working. So I think that perhaps perhaps using AI to create the bare bones of something is perhaps efficient, but we have a need for real humans with a critical brain that have knowledge of accessibility to go back and clean things up. So I'm not hopeful for the future of accessibility if we rely more and more and more on AI.
Yeah, that brought to mind a picture I saw today. I think I read something around why does ChatGPT output bad code, and the response was because it got trained on your bad code, and
Yes,
that's the reality.
that's exactly right. I mean, garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah, but then a lot of people see it as um, like the future, where you ask it an answer and a question and it gives you this accurate answer. And the truth is, it gets trained on data, and those data, and most of them don't get verified, and it
This is
just
maybe a little bit outside of the direct topic of accessibility, but maybe not that much. I think as a society, what one of the things we're losing is the ability to think critically, to analyze and questions what we're seeing in front of us. And without that ability, then AI is flying fine. It's giving us answers that don't make sense, and we don't question it. So that's going to be a problem. But I think that's going more into the main reasons why I don't really like AI
like,
and
yeah,
LLMs. That is not part of what we're talking about today.
yeah. I totally agree in terms of questioning things. We have people doing less questioning, and then with reliant on AI, we even have more of that, and I think things can keep going worse down the line. Maybe my first question would go to alt text, because also today I was reading something about alt text, and there are some people or product that I've seen that have like AI alt text generator. And the blog post I read today was more around if you give it an image, it can just tell you based on the context, maybe a man sitting on the lake or someone standing on the bench. And if you use those to generate your alt text for your website, it doesn't have context on the article or blog you are reading.
Yep.
So the alt text is not meaningful um, to you, and that is why I think AI hot in that perspective. And for these folks, they were trying to use passing the context of the article so that it can also use the context around it to define what the um, alt text would be. But still, the warning was more around. In some cases, he does a good job, but not as good as human. But then,
Mhm.
if you have to do it for a lot of articles at once, because they were trying to migrate all their blogs to make it more accessible, then it does it faster than human, but the precision in terms of having correct alt text may not be as good as.
So one of the things when I do accessibility workshops is that I use one image and I ask the attendees to describe the image. How would you write alt text for this? And people are a bit shy, and suddenly they start making suggestions. And in most cases, the suggestions are all good, even if they're very different. And then we start looking, as you say, at the context of the page. Where is this image used? Is it used on a blog post to illustrate that this event is good for families? Well, then the alt text need to be reflecting the family that's around the main character. Is this image used on a our services page that describes the adaptive skiing part of the program? Then the alt text needs to focus on the disabled skier, um, and there's all these different element of an image that typically we spend a lot of time selecting. When we're looking at large companies, marketing does not just go in a box and blindfolds and picks any image. They actually think about all the elements, the colors, the mood they want to evoke. So yes, you can get a machine to more or less describe what's there, but it's never going to be able to take the context into account. It's never going to be able to take the intent of the content writer into account.
Yeah.
And while using a tool to apply alt text to hundreds or maybe thousands of images because you're migrating a site is initially a good idea, I would have to question what's worse, having no alt text or having bad alt
Yeah.
text. It's like you're asking for directions. You're a tourist in a city. You're asking for direction to a hotel. Is it better to have someone you ask for direction says, "Actually, I don't know," or to tell you, "Hey, it's 2 kilometers this way, and then you turn left, and then you turn right," and that's not at all the direction the hotel's in, right?
Yeah.
So what's better? I'm not a blind screen reader user, but I would be willing to bet that knowing there's no information is better than having information you can't rely on. Because if you have 9 images that you can't rely on the alt text, how do you know that the 10th image has correct alt text? You don't. So if you have bad alt text throughout a majority of your site, it means all the alt text is potentially perceived as not good.
Yeah. And is there like when we name this alt text, should we focus on the length, the like too short or too long?
Right. So there is no real limit of length in terms of alt text you can write. Sometimes you will see web uh, posts that say it's 144 characters. If you're on LinkedIn, I think it's 2,000 characters, something like that. The reality is that technically you can write as long alt text as you want, but it needs to be clear and concise, and you don't want to do something so long that the screen reader users don't benefit from it, right? So um, typically I say, look at the image. What's the main element of the image? If it's a person, what are they doing? What kind of colors are used? That kind of stuff. And always think in terms of the intent. You keep the alt text clear and concise. You front load the information that's important. So you don't start by what the cat is doing on the bench behind the main character. You talk about, well, the main character is a Latina woman and
Yeah.
she's sitting on a comfortable chair drinking coffee, whatever. So front load the content, keep it clear and concise, and keep in mind the context of what's going on.
Ah, thanks. I'll keep that in mind because I also used to write. I also you never used to pay so much attention to alt text. I started using it some years ago that oh it's good for SEO, and then sometimes my alt text is something like a demo about the app or an image in the front yard or something very simple.
Yeah, I do believe that good alt text will be good for SEO, but you shouldn't write alt text for the purpose of SEO. The
Yeah,
web is built for humans to consume content. Um, Ideally, we're not building the web for machines, whether it's search engines or AI trying to learn what's out there.
yeah.
It's funny. It's funny to me that I've been talking about alt text for nearly 30 years, and you know, I think alt text is such a basic, critical element that by now it would be known by everybody. But the reality is, no, it's not known by everybody. And we still need to speak about alt text. We still need to explain how to write it. I'm on Blue Sky and I follow a lot of wildlife and nature photographers. And I actually had to write a blog post for them to know how do you write alt text in this context because they didn't know. And if you're a photographer, you want your work to be
Yeah.
known, and without alt text, you're limiting the exposure of your art to other people. So
Yeah.
it's a constant education.
Yeah, I guess there's no end because more people come into the pipeline or the workforce, and so it
Yep.
means more education. And not everybody talks about it. Some people do it for their work and less evangelism around the topic. So
If accessibility was discussed in computer science programs, in coding boot camps, was included in tutorials on the web, I think we would have a lot more people aware of what's going on, and a
true
lot smaller accessibility problem as a
issues.
whole.
Yeah, but we that is not the reality. People focus on
No.
what's going to make money. Same way, in my in my opinion, boot camps are also shifted to things like React and or when it got popular, and then we have developers who only know how to use React and less about the HTML semantics behind it and how
That's
the
right.
networking works behind it. So then, years later, they start trying to get re-educated about how the web works and all. And I think those are the consequences of leading by profits, probably, if I would put it that way.
Yes, but I think maybe thinking about profits before people first is a bad idea. But uh, thinking that accessibility is not going to have an impact on your profit is not understanding accessibility. First of all, an accessible website will make your site more performant. It'll be friendlier to search engines, but purely from a dollar, dollar perspective, who do they think disabled people are? We have in the United States 26% of the population has a significant disability. That's one person in four has a disability. And if you're blocking access to the services or to the products you're trying to sell to a quarter of your possible audience, do you not think that's missing money, right?
Yeah, I agree a lot, and I think we should pay more attention to that, or maybe people want to see more data on the percentage and see, oh,
Mm,
actually these people maybe um, it's a huge part of my audience and we should pay more attention to them.
yeah.
And yeah, for me, I come from I lived in Lagos, Nigeria, and there are some, I don't know the percentage, but in some places it's common to see disabled people, more physically disabled in terms of maybe not being able to walk or use their arm, and like moving to Germany after some years, I start thinking about how the society is around there because
Mm,
things are not designed by should I say by nature or by
yeah.
consequences to make it accessible for these folks, and everyone around never thinks about doing things to make it accommodating for them, and then
Yeah.
coming to Germany and seeing things like how the rail system are designed and traffic lights so that people know if they are close to the road and other areas like that, started making me aware that these things are really helpful because tomorrow maybe you got hit and you can't walk maybe for 1 month, and now you need to use those services, and
That's
you
right.
start seeing how this whole ecosystem plays out and why it's
Yeah.
nice to pay attention.
We rarely think about the fact that disability is one of those minorities that anyone can join at any time. Um, I had a programmer friend who was playing sports, and he broke his hand. He broke his right hand, and he could not use his mouse anymore. And suddenly he had to be a keyboard user, right? And he said, "Oh, well, that's interesting. I can't use most of the websites I normally use with just my keyboard." It's something he had not considered, even though I had been saying to him, look, you have a lot of people that are keyboard only users. He understood it in his head, but he didn't understand it in his heart until it happened to him,
Yeah.
right? We don't want everybody to go through a disabling event, whether it's permanent or temporary, to have that moment of understanding. But it's powerful when suddenly you have that experience. So yeah, you if you build a web to be accessible, in some ways you build a web for the future you that could be disabled.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I would switch a bit more to some of the other things I want to talk about, but I
Yeah.
think it's been nice to get through your experience around accessibility and AI and also the alt text part. And my next question will be around how we you see the intersection between web performance and accessibility. So if optimizing for web performance, with typical things we see around code splitting,
Mm,
JavaScript, if optimizing for that to an extent means it's affecting accessibility in the wrong way or in a
mm,
positive way, or doing the reverse in terms of okay, starting with a lot more accessibility in mind and building not just accessibility but building for your users so that everyone can use it, in turn affects your web performance and also probably SEO.
yeah. First, I should say that I believe that accessibility is one of three legs of any application out there. The first leg is performance, the second leg is security, and the third leg is accessibility. With these three, you build a solid foundation. Um, and we tend not to sell a product, hey, my application is $10,000, but if you want it to be performant, we're going to sell it to you for $15,000. Or, hey, my application is $10,000, but we're going to charge you $15,000 to have it secure. We don't charge for security and performance. We kind of build it in.
Hmm.
But so often we see, hey, if you want accessibility, it's going to be a third party plugin that you're going to have to pay extra for. Why do we do that? Because those three elements are so critical to a good quality application. And I think we're thinking about performance as a quality issue. If your website is not performant, then it's lacking in quality. If your website is not secure, it's lacking in quality. And we need
Hmm.
to think about accessibility the same way. Accessibility is a quality issue. If we're building things that are not accessible, they are broken. They do not have quality. Now, there is specific relationship between performance and accessibility. Um, the other day, I was auditing a page, and they used Angular, I think, and they used 37 lines of code. The Not the code under the hood. I'm talking about the markup. Was
Okay.
presented to the DOM was presented into 37 different lines that did not use semantic HTML elements. They did not use headings. They did not use any of the good stuff that makes a page accessible. I rewrote their 37 lines of code into 2 lines. Now, that will affect performance because you're outputting bloated code. You're outputting things that way more takes longer to load, and ultimately you're needing more space on your server. Now, it's arguable that 37 lines of code is not going to be that much more different, but that's just for a heading and a button. And when you're looking at today's web pages, if you have a lot of headings, a lot of article, a lot of content on your page, and you can reduce from 37 lines of HTML to 2 lines of HTML for everything, suddenly you have reduced the amount of content you're serving um,
to the user.
to the browser. And of course, the browser is able to um, analyze what's going on, build their DOM model, their DOM tree inside a lot faster, which means that the 87% of people that come to you on mobile will have a better experience. It kind of all ties in, but also when you're starting to look at outputting markup that is accessible, that's easy to parse, that's also a question of performance. Um, so that's just the big one. In terms of underneath, before we've put out the HTML, before we're pushing to the browser, what we're doing with HTML, with CSS, with JavaScript, um, the the clearer and easier the content you write, the faster it's going to be able to be rendered. If we're using that to try to recreate elements, for example, you can use, if you're doing a button in HTML, you use the button element and it knows that there's an on-click event, it knows that there's a label, it knows all these things. We need to be able to focus on it with keyboard and if you're having to use JavaScript to insert different attributes to a div to make it keyboard accessible, to make it uh, being able to do all the different things that really HTML does the heavy lift naturally, you've just added layers and layers of complications. And when we're looking at performance these days, we're looking at shaving fractions of seconds, right? So
Yeah.
it will make a difference.
And I guess that also takes longer to pass because it has more things to compute.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious from how you reduced from 37 to two lines. Is it using maybe a more modern HTML element, or was it
Yeah,
involved with a lot
yeah.
of JavaScript?
They were using um, divs and spans and custom elements to try to recreate a heading and a button and a line of text. So once you read this and you understand HTML, you can realize, oh, well, all this stuff that we're putting in is actually not necessary. Um, Bruce Lawson, one of the greats in accessibility, once told me that um, an average 3-year-old knows about 300 words in their own language. HTML has about 100 elements that is really important. So really it comes down to developers understanding HTML like a 3-year-old understands their own language, right?
Yeah. But I also think, like I said earlier, with boot camps, people, skip a lot of these steps and jump to
Yep.
React. And then also, which I've been culprit of, thinking about it, we use, maybe the shiniest or modern boilerplates or component library, and all these have a lot of things with them that maybe the author didn't care about accessibility, and for you just pick it up and throw it in.
People building patterns libraries have gone through the same boot camp that didn't teach accessibility, have gone through the same computer science programs that didn't teach accessibility, have followed the same tutorials on the web that didn't teach accessibility. So it's no surprise that they build a patterns library that is not accessible. We need to change that. I don't know what the answer is. It's all
Yeah.
around education, and a lot of good people have been thinking about that for a long time, and we're not sure what the answer is. But we need people that understand accessibility to build things that are accessible to propagate that.
Yeah, and probably also more because I think about 10 or 12 years ago when I was learning C sharp and tried to learn a bit about web development because with the web forms from .NET, I noticed course from the course platform I used then, there were courses around HTML, something around, I think, HTML semantics or around that subject. But these days, if I look at platforms with web courses, I don't see anything around semantics anymore.
Yeah.
And those things are out. It's usually maybe a bit of HTML, CSS, and responsive design. And then they move on to things around React. And those, I think, is also what gets shaped on, which what you get, what people show you to learn.
Yeah.
And if you don't learn it, you don't know it.
Yes. And then you're in a team that doesn't understand the importance of it, so you're not given the time and flexibility to improve accessibility in what you're building. Your product owner does not understand it. The ultimate client, whether you're building something custom for a client or you're building an app that you're trying to sell, people don't understand the accessibility needs. So the reality is that designers and developers and QA testers who have not been exposed to accessibility um, don't have an incentive to go and learn and spend time. But
Yeah.
I always encourage people to do guerrilla accessibility, include it in the work, even if it's not part of the brief, because it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. So lots of work around, I guess, education, becoming aware of it.
Yep.
And hopefully also conferences prioritize a bit more on that area and not so much about the trendy tech. I can understand from their part is also trying to show the trendy world so that they can get a lot of attendees and also make money from the event.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think it's a hard problem to solve.
It sure is. It sure is.
Yeah. So you mentioned Angular, and I was also curious about how these things affect maybe using a lot of single page applications and how they affect web performance and accessibility
Hmm.
because of, especially from the part of accessibility, because I know I used a lot of React, and React does a lot of re-rendering, and I've seen also people misusing it because maybe not properly learning, and then everything gets rendered. And I imagine from the point of view of like a screen reader, and also trying to pass something from the DOM tree, how how much it affects your the people that don't maybe see text the way or colors the way you see, because they have to use screen readers,
Yeah.
and how that plays into the topic.
These libraries, whether it's Angular, React, Vue, um, generally don't output accessible text. They're very flexible, but to get that flexibility, they rely on divs and spans rather than semantic elements. Um, Once the browser generates DOM tree, the DOM tree is used to build what is considered an accessibility tree. And the accessibility tree is what is used by screen readers um, to expose, to speak, to announce what's on the page. Um, Typically, a screen reader will cache the entire web page, so someone can navigate with the screen reader and do it quickly. So the screen reader looks at the accessibility tree, which looks at the DOM tree, which is generated by the browser based on what is sent by the patterns library, by React, Vue, Angular. If what is sent to the DOM tree is a bunch of divs and spans and spaghetti markup with no solid consideration for semantically meaningful elements, for elements that are actually have accessibility features, then what is being sent from the DOM tree to the accessibility tree will be very limited. The accessibility tree should include things like, hey, what is this element? Is it a button? Is it a link? Is it a paragraph? If it's a button, does it have a label? If it's a link, what's the destination of the link? What's the text of the link? So I said earlier, garbage in, garbage out, and it's a little bit like that. If you're sending spaghetti code um, to the DOM tree, then the accessibility tree will struggle to be able to make paint a picture that is going to be useful for the screen reader user. You can, using React or Angular or whatnot, you can use divs and then use ARIA attributes to modify things. So you can take a div and apply a role of button to it, and suddenly it will be announced in the accessibility tree. Instead of being announced as a neutral element, it will say, this is a button. But if you're only adding role button, you're missing parts of what makes a button a button. For example, you need to make sure that the element can receive keyboard focus. A div cannot receive keyboard focus. So suddenly you need to add a tab index value to your div. So you have to have div role button tab index equals 0, because then suddenly adding tab index equals 0 is making the pseudo button keyboard focusable. And you have several different things you have to build and add to your div to make this thing. The more you add to your markup, the more your browser is going to struggle to produce the DOM tree, and the more the accessibility tree has a risk of being broken or not containing the right information. And if the accessibility tree doesn't have the right information, then the screen reader will not be able to invent what's there.
Yeah. So more on using the right elements and
Yes.
telling the framework what to do exactly.
Yes.
So somehow I feel maybe the framework should just have a way to check this and output it, because a lot of people rely so much on the framework. So maybe
If the framework first had good documentation about accessibility, B
okay.
had checks and balances that says, hey, you're sending in a div that looks like it wants to be a button. Why don't you send a button? That would be fantastic. But the reality is that's not what's happening out there.
Yeah. I could use the example of the image component, which is like common in Next.js, and I see other frameworks also doing the same thing. Is when they focus a lot on the specifying the weight and the size, and not on the alt text. So you could have a lot about the or specify the weight and size, and maybe using a lightweight image, maybe like Aviv or WebP.
Yep.
The, they focus more on how much it takes to download and load, but then for users that are not visual, the alt text is more important, and then you miss that out in your required attributes.
Let me ask you this. What happens when you're looking at a web page on your phone, and suddenly you're between cell towers, and instead of 5G or 4G, you are stuck on 3G, and everything is so slow to load. And because your website is graphics intensive, you got all the text, but you have none of the images. If you had alt text, that gets rendered before the image. So your user can still actually benefit from the content, even if the images don't load on their mobile because they're traveling and there's bad cell access, right?
Yeah.
So it really is critical to have alt text. And I'm sorry I'm talking so much about alt text today, but it is what it is. It's one of these things, 30 years in the making, and we're still talking about that.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's important also for me. It's something that I'm sure I've misused a lot. So, learning a bit on like how to better use this for me is good. And I'm curious how, still on alt text a bit is we have the figure element with and you have the fig caption. I haven't tried it, but I'm curious how this renders if you have the alt text and the fig caption, if it will render the caption instead of the alt text, and if you should make both the same kind of content.
The figure and fig caption element is a tricky one because fig caption does not serve the same purpose as the alt text. The alt text describes the image, what is actually there, but the fig caption, can describe different things. Like, say for example, you're displayed a chart of data, and it's a bar graph, and you have um, I don't know, whatever bar graph data. The alt text should describe the graph and the elements on the graph, what bar is which data. But the fig caption can start talking about, well, hey, this graph is derived from data that came out of a study in 2017. We had so many different people, and so you can describe the context of the image as opposed to describing the image itself. Now, this is complicated by the fact that not all browsers will render the fig caption and the figure element the same way in their DOM tree, which means it's not going to be rendered the same way in the accessibility tree. And then the different screen readers are not using that information the same way either. So um, I think figure and fig caption was really well intentioned when it came out in HTML5. I think it's got room for improvement. We should use it where possible, but don't think for a minute that it means you can't use alt text. You
Okay.
must use alt text for your images.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. We're coming up on time, so I would try to pick a question that would be a nice ending. I have two here, but I will just pick one. So, are there any accessibility practice or pattern that you think when you build with that as a principle, then it automatically leads to better web performance for you in general? Like something for someone that is not used to accessibility, to keep in mind, or even if the person is used to accessibility.
I think it goes back to knowing HTML. As an accessibility auditor, the majority of accessibility errors I see are because the markup contains badly formed HTML, missing elements, missing attributes. So if you want to improve your performance and you want to improve accessibility, go out there, learn HTML, make sure that what you build outputs valid and semantically meaningful HTML. And I guarantee you that your websites, your web page, your SPAs will A, be faster and be more accessible.
Yeah, you had that. Go learn HTML. Maybe I need to retake HTML course again and go back to semantics.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's my final questions. And do you have any other tip or comment to add before we wrap up?
Yeah. I think that for most people out there, they don't know about accessibility. They don't understand why it's important, in large part because they don't know disabled people. They don't know how disabled people use the web. And learning about how people use the web and what kind of barriers they're encountering is really, for a lot of people, a game changer because suddenly they understand the real impact that their work has or doesn't have on people. So I would invite people, where possible, to learn about how people use the web. I'm going to plug my own podcast, The Accessibility Rules, which contains, I have something like 65 interviews with disabled people about the barriers they encounter on the web. So my website is the Accessibility Rules Podcast, and the URL for that is a11yrules.com. You can also go on the um, Web Accessibility Initiatives website from the W3C. So that's w3.org/WAI. And there's a lot of information about accessibility there, including uh, perspectives video from different disabled people using the web. So that will help people understand why it's important and give them a nudge to think a little bit outside the box. I hope.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the link you mentioned for the W3C content. Do you mind mentioning the
Yeah.
website again?
Oops. Putting it in
The chat.
um, the chat. So it's w3.org/WAI.
Okay, yeah. I'll drop that in the comment and put it in the show later. I struggle to be able to reach the podcast one. I have a11yrules.com. Is that correct?
Yes. Let me see
Well,
what's going on.
I
Just
tried
a sec.
to click the link earlier from your profile, but it didn't open. And
Oh, okay. It looks like my site is down. I will. The URL is correct.
okay,
I will load it up. That's weird.
yeah. So go check out the podcast. I think I will also come back to check it out and see. And it's been a pleasure talking to you, Nicholas.
It's been
And
great.
where can people find you? Uh,
I'm These days I'm on LinkedIn. Nicolas Steenhout is easy to find. I'm probably the only one. I'm also on Blue Sky. I spend quite a bit of time there. So again, Nicolas Steenhout, and my website, nicola-steenhout.com, is probably the best way to find me.
Nice. Yeah. The link to the LinkedIn is on the show description, so you find it on the YouTube description, and I think from there you can find his website and podcast. So feel free to look that up. And if you have any question, I'm sure Nick will be happy to connect because he's also been very generous to appear on my podcast, and I feel happy to have him share his knowledge. And see you all next time. Next month we have another live stream next one, but this time not on accessibility and or web performance, but we try to keep on topic. and see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you.